Hi, my name is Derek Merkler, and my unexpected hobby is breeding thoroughbred racehorses.
Welcome to Unexpected Hobbies of Financial Advisors, the podcast where we interview fellow financial advisors about their pursuits and pastimes beyond their professional persona, some of which may be surprising to their colleagues and clients. We're interested in what makes them tick and how their unexpected hobbies might or might not relate to their everyday lives. Here's our discussion with this week's guest. Welcome to the Unexpected Hobbies of Financial Advisors podcast. I'm Brian Wright with Fiduciary CFO, alongside my co-host and fellow financial advisor, Joshua Walker.
How do you do?
I do well. How do you do?
I also do well.
Fantastic. Oh, today, Joshua, we have a good one. I know you are excited about this. You just smile, you're ear to ear. You're so excited to talk to this guy. All right, so we have Derek today talking to us about breeding racehorses, right?
Yep. Hey, good morning.
Good morning.
I'm glad to be here as well. And we're recording on the date that's opening day at Keeneland, so I'm excited to head out there after we're done.
Oh, wow. What an auspicious occasion. So how about that?
Which is why you're dressed so dapper, right?
Exactly.
So is that the dress code at this facility?
Yes. So it depends where your seats are, if you will, or where your tickets are at Keeneland. But I'm on the fourth floor today as part of a party being held for people who send some of their horses to an organization called Darley America to breed their mares. And so they're hosting a party up there for us. And on the fourth floor, it's coat and tie required for men. But if on other days, if you're down on the apron, much more casual dress is allowed.
Okay. And for those of us geographically challenged, where in the world is Keeneland and where do you do your work?
Absolutely. So I live in Georgetown, Kentucky, which is a smaller town just north of Lexington, Kentucky. And Keeneland is the primary racetrack outside of Lexington, Kentucky. So it's just a little bit west of town. And there's 2 3-week-long race meets that are held each year, April and October. And I think it's some of the top level racing that you would see. Now, most people are familiar with the Kentucky Derby. That's at Churchill Downs, which is about an hour away. But here at Keeneland, now some people might argue this point with me, but we would kind of compare it to Augusta in golf, on its relative standing.
Not to brag. You guys are a big deal. Okay. And so how long have you been doing this and how did you get into it?
So technically, I think it started about 2012. And if we take a step back, I'm not just in this business by myself. It's more of a family business, and I'm partners primarily with my mother on all of this. So she's been around horses or had horses since she was a kid. And so I grew up around them as well. When I lived in Kentucky as a kid, we had a farm, and she had a boarding operation where she would take care of other people's horses and things like that. And then she eventually got into breeding thoroughbreds for herself. When I was 10, we moved to Iowa, and she continued that operation there. And at this point, I really wasn't that interested. Horses, I've been around horses my whole life, so they weren't that interesting to me. I loved watching the Kentucky Derby every year, but that was about it. And so she continued that operation. I went to college and graduated, joined the Army, spent some time doing that. And, for better or worse, I had done a lot of saving in my early days as an Army officer. And one day, 2012 timeframe, she called me up and asked me if I wanted to be partners on this one baby horse that she had. We call them weanlings. So once they're separated from their mother, we call them weanlings. So she wanted to know if I wanted to buy half of it, and I did. I had the money from other successful investments, and so I said, sure, why not? And that was about the extent of the conversation. I sent her the money and really knew didn't know much about the process. And about a year later, so when the horse was 1 year old, which we call yearlings, we sold it at one of the auctions. And I forget the exact numbers, but I probably doubled my money. And, so I'd put like 4,000 in and got 8,000 back to something like that. So that's a nice return, but certainly doesn't change lives at that point. And then after that happened, she then calls me up and says, well, I've got this mare and she's a little bit, so mare is an older female horse. And she's a little bit tough to get her pregnant. And the business partner that owns the other half wants out. And I said, okay, well, how much are we talking about here? $2,500. And I'm like, okay, sure. I just made money from the first horse, so I'll do this. And so this is 2013 timeframe. And I forget if it was, I think I may have actually been in Afghanistan when this happened. So, it's just like one of my routine calls home and, again, just a conversation and made sure the money was available or whatever. And now I owned half this mare and, still really, really know nothing about it. And a couple years later, she had, I think a year later at this point, she had her first baby that I was part owner on. And we ultimately sold that baby as a yearling, 1 year old horse. We sold it for, and I'm not sure, you may want to cut this out if we don't want to necessarily talk figures, but we sold it for $80,000.
Oh boy. Okay.
So, I had basically turned, $2,500 plus at the time, the stud fee, which was maybe was like $5,000 or something like that. So, maybe for me, all in, I had $6,000 or $7,000 in this horse, and we sold it for 80.
Wow. Wow.
And then that was that. And I and I kept my half ownership of the mare. And then in 2018, she had another horse, another mare that had a foal that earned points to qualify. Not enough, unfortunately, but initially earned points to qualify for the 2019 Kentucky Derby.
Ew.
And that's when I started to know, like, hey, this might actually be pretty cool and fun. So let me get a little bit more into this. And, I still didn't know about the details of breeding horses and things like that, how you pick stallions. And we can get into all those details as well. But, at that point, I started having more interest in wanting to be involved in what we do with this one mare. And eventually, later in 2019, I made the decision that I wanted to be much more involved in this. And longer story shorter, I went from just half of that mare to now I own all or part of 7 mares. And before we sold a few yearlings last month, I was up to 18 horses of my own total.
Wow. So the first thing, we'll go in order. You've used the word thoroughbred for a couple of times. What do you mean exactly when you say thoroughbred?
Good. That's a good question. I mean, this is one of the problems I have with talking about this industry is I kind of get lost in the lingo and I'm not always very clear on what that is. So a thoroughbred is a breed of horse. Fortunately or unfortunately, I'm not an expert in other breeds, but if you've heard of a quarter horse, that is a breed of horse. If you think in terms of pets, a golden retriever, right, is a breed of dog. And you have purebreds and mixes and things like that. So a thoroughbred is a specific type of breed of horse, and it's actually human created. So it's not something that occurred naturally. It was early 1700s was when the thoroughbred was created, and there were 3 founding stallions, so male horses, that were bred to English brood mares to create the thoroughbred.
Okay.
And they're known for their speed combined with endurance.
So if I understand correctly, the quarter horse is a breed that is bred to run a quarter mile, and the thoroughbred is then for endurance a longer race. Or am I cooking stuff up in my head?
I I wouldn't go into that level of
Okay.
specificity for a quarter horse, and I couldn't necessarily tell you what the name comes from. But yes, they are, from a racing perspective, because there are quarter horse races, they are actually a lot faster than thoroughbreds. But they might have a race that's 300 yards or 600 yards, where thoroughbreds, probably going minimum 1,000 yards or 1,200 yards, up to some races overseas, they're going 3 miles.
Whoa. Okay. So that would be multiple laps around a track then.
Yes.
Okay.
And here in the United States, the common race distances are between 3/4 of a mile and 1 1/4 miles.
Okay. You switched from yards to miles. Is there a standard, or is it a goofy set of traditions?
Well, quarter horses, a lot of their races are measured in yards. So I was just trying to make some comparisons. But
Okay.
but actually with thoroughbreds, they primarily measure the distance in something called a furlong, which is 1/8 of a
Yeah.
mile. And then once you get to a mile, they'll say 1 mile or 1 1/4 or whatever. Um,
Completely
so
sensible.
that's
Yeah.
how they're. And I couldn't tell you the history of a furlong, where that comes from. Sorry on that one.
Yeah. Different set of questions. So are these critters considered capital assets, where you're talking about basis and long-term gains and short-term gains? Or is that
Uh, yes. So there's not really long-term and short-term gains. They would be like a capital gain would be treated as normal income. But they do get depreciated
Oh.
as well. So
Don't we all?
there's
Like-
there's a lot of flexibility around the timing of depreciation, depending on what the type of horse is. So like for a broodmare, which is a female horse that is held primarily for the purposes of breeding, there's a separate depreciation schedule for them. It's 5 or 7 years, I forget off the top of my head, versus a racehorse, which is usually depreciated over 3 years. And you can choose like when you place it in service too.
like any asset.
So kind of, right? But you can own the horse and decide to place it in service at a different time.
It's
if
a
you
pet
want to.
until then. It's just the family pet, right?
Kind of,
Yeah.
yeah.
And so what is the
Um,
racing lifespan of a horse? You've got weanlings, and then they can start to race as yearlings. And then, of course, it depends on how good they are, but what's the plausible standard?
Yeah, so they will generally start training as a later yearling. And so thoroughbreds, quote unquote, birthdays are all January 1st. So they don't get
Like
tracked
kindergartners.
Sure, yeah. They don't get tracked by actual age. So when we talk about a yearling, or we'll stick with yearling for a moment. That means that they have gone through at least one January 1st since they were born. So whether they were born in May or February, when they hit January 1st, they are officially a yearling. And so September, October of the yearling year is generally when they will start training. So they will first learn how to take commands from a human, and then eventually be saddled up and then start fitness training. And the earliest race that they'll have will be April of their 2-year-old year.
Okay.
It's more common that they'll race July, August, September of their 2-year-old year, assuming everything goes to plan. If they have troubles with injuries, there's a possibility they don't even race till their 3-year-old year. And then as far as how long they race, if they are healthy and managed well, you can see some 5-6-year-old horses that are still racing. In some extreme examples, you might see a 9 or 10-year-old horse, but that's fairly rare. Generally by the time they hit 5, they're most of them are done for one reason or another.
Sure.
Either they have some ongoing injuries that are too difficult to manage, or they're just not performing. And so, it's more expensive to keep them in training. Or, maybe sometimes, back to the not performance thing, sometimes they're just not interested in beating other horses, so they can't earn any money on the track.
There's a personality component as well. They have to have the competitive edge internally.
Yes.
Yep. Okay.
It's kind of amazing to think about that.
So is there some like strategy around whether you want your yearling born the last week in December versus the second week in January? Is it kind of like having a kid that was born in the summer and deciding whether you wait to send them to kindergarten or wait another year? They'll be bigger for football. You want to wait?
Yeah, that's a good question. So the gestation period for a horse is typically 11 months. Some may go a little bit longer. We have a couple of mares that like to go to 12 months, which makes managing their career as a broodmare a little bit difficult. But you're generally not going to want a horse born after May 31st. So
yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So after May 31st, that means, they're 7 months old at a minimum by the time they officially become a yearling. And that's, again, because, as you look at the life cycle of these horses, you don't want something born in December that is automatically a yearling by the time it's 3 weeks old. Nobody's going to buy that at a sale or anything like that, because, you don't want a 2-year-old racing in 3-year-old races and vice versa. So we generally, the breeding season and foaling season is in the spring. And, we kind of target our first foals to be born late February, early March. But, the first foals in Kentucky are hitting the ground in general in mid to late January.
Okay. And the timing of that is completely within your control, right? There's no spontaneous conception. You're managing that.
Correct. And so to a point, like, there's still nature involved, but, with my business, we don't own a stallion. We just own the broodmares. And, so one of the unique things about thoroughbreds, which is one of the reasons Kentucky is such a focal point, is that in order to have a registered thoroughbred, the mare and the stallion, or the mom and the dad, they have to actually meet to conceive. There's no artificial insemination or anything like that to have a registered thoroughbred. So that is one of the reasons, like I said, Kentucky is such a big deal in thoroughbred racing, is because this is where the stallions are. I live within 45 minutes of 90% of the best thoroughbred stallions in the world. And so we do have some control, right? They can't get spontaneously pregnant in the field because there's nobody there to do that.
Right. Jurassic Park.
Right. There's not that, at least that hasn't happened yet, to my knowledge.
Okay. Well, during the intro, Brian mentioned that how excited I was. I'm a career changer into financial planning and started that a couple of years ago. The family business to date has been in the AI, and the original AI, artificial insemination. We make estrus detectors for dairy cows. And so he's learned a little bit about breeding but strictly on the artificial side, because I have nothing to say about natural breeding and natural coverage, because that's not what we've done in the dairy world since the 1950s. But you guys, so why haven't you embraced modernity and gone to semen in tanks like big world? We're going to put an SFW tag on this, Brian. Right.
Yeah. I don't know what necessarily the official answer is. I mean, some of it is probably, vested interests or old interests protecting their businesses. This practice originated from the idea of guaranteeing the pedigree, and really kind of started 1840s, 1850s, just before the Civil War. There were some people in the United States who kind of on their own started compiling pedigree books, which the pedigree is, the compilation of the family line,
Generations,
their
breed
ancestors.
heritage.
Yeah. Yep. And the practice of them meeting in, actually physically meeting is to guarantee that pedigree and prevent fraud. And so that's continued to this day, and that's been the structure. And I don't think, maybe there's a desire for, on the basis of some perspectives, to end that. But ultimately, in a lot of ways, it's probably self-correcting in the sense that, there's, I think this year there were 17,000 thoroughbred foals, and the foal crop has been declining for 20 years. And, even if you had AI, I don't think you would necessarily see an increase in the number of thoroughbreds.
And as you were dancing through your answer, I sort of realized I put you in an awkward position because whoever controls the breed registry is going to have authority. And if those people say, we don't want AI, then that's going to be that. So if it's the stallion folks controlling it, that makes sense. And if it's the mare folks controlling it, you'd end up with a totally different outcome. So I'm sorry for putting you in an awkward position with all of your potential business partners.
Oh, that's not controversial in any form. I just was trying to articulate it in a way that gave somewhat of an answer without me knowing the exact details of everything.
Well, I think you need a little more, I would assume, like maybe the table stakes a little higher with breeding racehorses. Like you want precision in your outcome versus just, we need cows to make milk. It's like you're not looking for a certain flavor of milk. So you get the chocolate cows with chocolate milk, but maybe some of that, but it's also, there's so much, it's steeped so much in tradition that I would, it seems plausible that it's like, that's the way we've always done it.
I would put the tradition of the Jersey and Guernsey and Holstein breeds up against the thoroughbreds.
Ooh, them's fighting words.
Okay, well, in order to not have this completely go devolving into an agricultural conversation, we can steer this in a different direction. How far is your farm from your day job? You talked about having to go to a certain place, and 90% of the horse world is within a certain distance of you, but how much traveling is involved in your routine life to exercise this hobby?
Well, luckily I work from home, so I'm just upstairs in my house as we're recording for the financial planning business. The farm is about 10 minutes away. So and depending on what's going on, I might be out there 7 days a week, or I might be out there once or twice during the week. Luckily, I mentioned earlier that my mother and I are primarily in this business together, and she takes care of most of the day-to-day horse stuff during routine times. And then there's other periods where, like if we're expecting a foal, a mare's about to foal, I might be sleeping out, on the couch there, or ready to zoom out there. So we also sell our own horses ourselves at auction. We don't pay somebody else to do it. So when we're preparing them, it's about a 2-month process to prepare them for a sale. And so I might be out there 3 to 6 days a week doing that, depending on which sale the horses are going to and things like that.
Is there a rhythm to the auction season that lines up well with the rhythm of the racing season?
Well, yes and no. Here, yes. Here in Lexington, yes. So Keeneland is probably also one of the largest auction houses for thoroughbreds in the world. Keeneland just finished what is called the Keeneland September sale, and that is a 2-week-long sale just for yearling thoroughbreds, so 1-year-old thoroughbreds. And there were about somewhere between 4,000 and 4,500 horses that went through that sale, and I think the gross proceeds were $400 million, somewhere in that regard. So that was in September, and then all those horses leave, the racehorses ship in, and, like today is the first day of the race meet. But there's racing in Kentucky at different tracks all year round. And really there's racing all year round throughout the country too. So that the different tracks in different states will coordinate with each other to find the right dates to split their race meets. So there's not necessarily too much conflict. And so, the sales, the auctions are still happening. There's specific ones throughout the year, but they're happening during, quote unquote race season as well, because race season is all year.
Do you follow the careers of the progeny that your mares have put forth into the sphere?
Yes, absolutely. And that is very important because the offspring's performance on the track, if it's good, then makes subsequent offspring more valuable.
Right.
So,
right.
if there's, and I don't have a catalog up here, but in the auction catalog, each horse has its own page, and it's got all the information on that family, sometimes going back 4 generations. And for a given, like if you're selling a yearling and the mother's or the mare's information is listed, it will say how many foals she's had, how many of racing age she's had, how many have started, how many have won. So, if you have a mare, let's say you're 5 foals in and that mare has not produced a winner, that next offspring may not be as valuable. Now, that's not always the case, but it's generally the general trend. Whereas if you have a mare who's produced multiple stakes winners, well, you're going to get a nice sum for the next offspring you sell.
And the same goes for the stallion fees.
Well, the stallion fees are well, yes, in a sense. So the better,
if he's making winners.
Well, yes,
Yeah.
yes. The more initially, the better success he's had on the racetrack will set his initial stud fees, and then if he's producing a lot of winners, then his stud fees might go up further. And really, the judge for a stallion is how many stakes winners he produces.
What's the recovery period once a mare has given birth before she can be considered eligible again for another go?
Generally, 30 to 45 days.
Okay. And what is the fertility window? If you're going to take the mare to see the stallion, what's your window of time that you're trying to hit? Because for a dairy cow, it's very short. It's 12 hours every 21 days. And our job at KMR Heat Mount Detectors is to tell the operator when that window is opening. How does it work for yours?
For mares, it's, you've got maybe 24 hours, maybe 30 hours of a window. Okay. And, so that can be a bit difficult, and our reproductive veterinarian is out at the farm probably 4 days a week during breeding season, because he's ultrasounding the mares, trying to figure out if they're ovulating or about to ovulate, or, if they're about to, how long do you have? And then you're on the phone to the stallion manager to see if the stallion that you booked the mare to is available and what time that is. And, it might be 7 a.m. the next morning. It might be midnight the next day.
Okay. And to get really crass, how frequently can a stallion do his job? What's his recovery period?
If they're really pushing it, 4 times a day.
Okay. Enough in that direction. Yeah. And you mentioned earlier before we were getting going that you have a line separating the financial planning business and the from a business side. But are you able to do client events out at the track or get clients from the horse world, or do you really try to keep them separated?
Well, two different questions which I can go into there. So with my ongoing clients, and the majority of my clients, at least my niche number 1, is going to be military veterans. So in that case, yes, I do client events, client and or prospect events twice a year. Usually it's around this time. So what I'll do is I'll invite everybody in. They can travel in to Lexington, and in the morning, say on Saturday of opening weekend, whether it's April or October, they might come out to our farm and meet our mares and babies, and then we may go to a stud farm to see what those are like, and they meet some of the stallions, maybe get a tour, and then we go to the races.
So that's like tomorrow then.
Yeah. And this year I'm not doing it, or this fall I'm not doing it, partially because I blew out my knee about a month ago. So I can't necessarily take care of a group of 20 people or something like that effectively. But yeah, I usually do that about twice a year. And sometimes we'll do something a little bit different with different timing. So I actually have some clients in South Carolina, and among other things, they're in the cattle business as well, Tokena Angus in upstate South Carolina. And I had them out here for the Keeneland September sale to see what those auctions are like, because they run their own cattle auction every year in South Carolina. And I brought them up here to see all of that, and they were thrilled by it. But
Rightly so.
yeah, and I do not, explicitly keep racehorses and financial planning separate, because there are so many examples of success with buying and selling racehorses or breeding and selling potential racehorses. And just like in the stock market, right? If you were part of the GameStop mania and you got in the bottom and got out the top, you're at the top, you're rich and you want to do it again. So most likely you probably try it over and over again until you're out of money. Or Nvidia is another maybe more recent, less speculative example, but it's a tough business and the odds are against you generally. So like, even for me, if I didn't have a desire to be around horses and watch horses that I created go to the track and win, I wouldn't be doing this either. We've made money some years, we've lost money some years, but frankly, at a personal level, every time I go to buy a new mare, in my mind, I'm essentially extending out my retirement date from a probability perspective.
Oh no.
So, maybe that sounds bad, but that's why I try to keep financial planning clients away from it, because it's exciting. But, if I wanted to bring them into what I was doing, I mean, there's so much opportunity for disappointment just on the personal or professional side. And I don't want that to get in the way of things. And, that's all before we even get to the legal questions and compliance questions and conflicts of interest and all that kind of stuff. And I don't want to have that ruin relationships. But I will say that the last few months, I've added a second niche, which I don't have any clients yet because it's new, but I'm going to be focusing on being a one-stop shop for race jockeys. So the guys, the men and women that ride the horses in the races, they live a tough life. And there's nobody really out there from a finance perspective that focuses on working with them, whether it's taxes, bookkeeping, or financial planning, investment management, retirement, and all the other, foundational pieces that go into a financial plan. You think 401ks, life insurance, health insurance, disability insurance, all that kind of stuff. There's really nobody out there that focuses on
I assume that's 1099 business, right?
Yep.
So is there a union? Is there a jockeys union?
There is a jockeys guild, yes. And so it's kind of a union, but the only role they have in terms of what jockeys make, or might be like the base fee that a jockey earns for a mount on a race, and I forget what the current one is. Maybe it's like $100 or $120 or something to that effect. But the jockeys are making their money from race earnings. So they're going to earn 10% of whatever their horse earns in a given race.
And there's not some massive union pension fund out there for them. So it beats the classic definition of a niche that, of course, jockeys have unique needs. And so they need a unique kind of professional so yeah, best wishes with that new endeavor.
Okay, that's direction. Cool. Very cool.
Thank you. Yeah, I've done a lot of work interviewing people, and I've had this idea in my mind for a few years, but figuring out how to implement it and know what they need and the challenges they face has taken me a while to gather the information to put it all together.
And suddenly you're the best in the world at it because nobody else is doing it. So
hopefully, yeah.
Well, maybe this content can help amplify your this new niche. We get this trending in the horse breeding circles that might have overlap with the people you want to get this in front of.
How do people, you got into this as a family business. Are there other standard paths into this? Like, do you inherit oil money from the Middle East or entertainers from California that come in and we're going to be the next big thing? How do people end up in doing what you do?
I figured that you would ask a question like this, and I don't have a great answer. It's one of those industries where there's so little public information that if you don't have a connection, it seems like it's hard to get in. Like, what I'm trying to say is if you have some horse experience and you want to get in at the bottom level, you could probably show up at a training barn, during a race meet and maybe get a job as a hot walker, helping the horses cool down after a race or a workout.
Okay.
And that probably isn't too difficult. And sometimes it's tough to find people to do that. Now, the pay isn't great, but you could start there, work your way up as a groom, and so on and so forth. But there's just what I told you about, that you could walk to a barn or try a few barns during a meet and potentially get a job. Most people don't even know that. They see the Kentucky Derby, right? That's what they know. And there's, just like any other sport, if you think of Major League Baseball, you have the major leagues, and then you have all the way down to the part-time players, right, that have dreams of making it to the big league. Well, there's that in horse racing as well, but there's not necessarily a way to just know that. Like, you can't necessarily go to a website and they say, "Oh, show up at this place," and they will help you get an entry-level job, and you can work your way up from there. Now, from the wealthy or celebrity side of things, there's probably, again, I couldn't necessarily give you a specific answer, but horse racing is called the sport of kings, and if you show up to the game with a lot of money, you can be pretty successful at also earning a lot more money, just like anything else, right?
Right.
Or almost anything else. And so some people, maybe someone has a lot of success in the business world, and then they rub shoulders with somebody who's in the thoroughbred industry, and that's the initial connection. But there's not a lot of people who, after they reach significant wealth, that just innately know, oh, I want to own racehorses.
Right. Unless they grew up reading Black Beauty and they start the next Tesla and they decide, finally, I've got my seed money.
Yeah. So it's not necessarily a difficult. The industry is not saying stay away, right? But it's just hard to know. There's not a lot of public information on where to start, and that's some of the nature of the industry itself. It's still kind of, if you think about ownership and regulations around ownership and buying and selling horses, I mean, there's some structure, but I would still consider it closer to the Wild West than buying stock on the New York Stock Exchange.
Sure.
Right. There's a lot of issues that people can run into.
What about the demographics around that, the hobby or the industry, I guess? Is it a bunch of old white men, or are there young people? And if there are young people, are the young people because, well, my parents do it, because my grandparents did it, and talk about that. I'm curious.
There's certainly a lot of family legacy. Now, there's certainly the old white male demographic, but I guess it kind of depends on where you're at in the industry. If you're a big-time owner or a big-time trainer, probability suggests you're going to be a white male. But there are a lot of successful women trainers out there. And I've actually had a lot of discussions with other people on this. I have a theory that sometimes they're more focused on the horses and less on the business. So that in a way impedes them, maybe not impedes them, but just creates a separate desire around their training operation. So instead of trying to build it as big as they possibly can, perhaps, they get to a size that they can still see their horses. The trainers can see their horses every day, and still be very close to their horses versus running a conglomerate.
Sure. We see that in the dairy world as well, not to completely get myself canceled, that when you're caring for mothers, and you're caring for milking creatures, and you're caring for calves, objectively data-driven, women do a better job of taking care of calves and taking care of these animals. They are better at it for whatever reason. Not going to speculate, but caring, nurturing.
Okay. And so, just to finish up on that, in other areas of the sport, especially grooms and hot walkers and people who work in the barns, you do see a lot of Hispanics. And that's so on a given day, if you're out at a track, you're going to be hearing Spanish, Portuguese. Depending on the location and the time of year, you're also going to run into Japanese owners or Japanese operations, South Korean operations. I mean, it is a worldwide phenomenon that you see a lot of international or people from overseas coming here as well. We've had horses purchased by South Koreans. We've had horses go to Saudi Arabia, Europe, and then all over the country. So, there is a decent amount of diversity, probably not directly reflective of the population, but it's not just white men.
Yeah. All right. The other question I had, I wanted to set you up as a softball. We get this in dairy. It's going to be the same for you. There is a public set of concerns and stigma over animal welfare. So tell me about the growth and progress and the regulations that you guys have to make sure you're taking the very best care of the animals that are in your care, that are precious to you.
Well, that's a complex topic in and of itself. Certainly there is an organization called HISA, H-I-S-A, Horse Racing Integrity and Safety Association, or something to that effect. We just call it HISA. And so there's a lot of controversy around that. It was a federal law that was basically added to one of the emergency COVID bills. So, nobody really likes regulation that shows up as part of something else that was passed as part of an emergency. So there's been a lot of controversy around that, a lot of challenges, constitutional challenges, and that's still playing out in the courts. So they've instituted a lot of rules around the care of horses on the racetrack that are a little bit more strict than some state rules that existed before. So previously, horse racing was mostly governed at the state level. State government entities wrote the rules, and that could vary from place to place. And like anything, you're always going to have a part of a group that does less than positive things to their animals one way or another. I mean, you can look at just like pet owners, right? Some pet owners, their pets are like humans, and others, they just get tied to a leash outside until they die.
Or financial advisors, bad apples.
Well,
the great ones don't get amplified. It's the knuckleheads that end up ruining it for everybody else. No, that that makes sense.
So it's tough all around. So sure, it's easy to say, well, everybody has to take good care of their animals, and it's easy to say that, but ultimately that means a lot of different things to a lot of people.
What is a fiduciary anyway?
Well, yeah, exactly. Right. So, you'll see people arguing online. One person will think a horse is being taken care of well, and another person will think that it's animal neglect and you should go to jail, right? And so I think if somebody is wanting to enter the industry from the outside, there are more than enough good actors where you can put together a team, whether it's for breeding or for racing, that is going to care for the horse. But you as the owner are really the ultimate authority on that. So, for me, as an example, my 2-year-old racehorse is back home here in Kentucky. She raced 5 races as a 2-year-old, and she's going to have the next few months off before we put her back into training, because my objective with her is for her to race until she's 5 or 6 years old. And I think giving her time off every year is critical to that. But when you start to look at the financials of all of this stuff, a lot of these horses have to stay in training in order to pay for themselves. And a lot of it just comes down to money, as far as ongoing decision making. And the industry itself has put a lot of time and effort into developing aftercare organizations where racehorses can retire, or be retrained into another profession like dressage or jumping or trail riding, things like that, that they could do for 15, 20 years before they are too old to do that kind of stuff.
Are there any special memories that you have as you've been doing this over the last 12 or 13 years that are especially meaningful that you're going to remember and tell your grandkids about someday?
I'll share 2. One of them I think is a good example of how the world financial markets and the prices of horses are intertwined. And I think the thoroughbred industry would be a great place to study I think it's called the Cantillon effect, where when the central bank prints money, who benefits first? Anyway, separate topic. But so I told you about that first baby that I actually was part breeder on, and she sold for $80,000 in July of, I think, 2016, if my memory serves me correctly. Well, we'd actually tried to sell her at a different auction in January of 2016, and that was there was like a Chinese economic growth crisis that caused world stock markets to drop almost 20% during that time frame. And so I remember, I wasn't at the auction myself, but I remember the day the horse was supposed to sell, I spoke to my mother on the phone, and she said, there's really nobody here. We might get $500 or $1,000 for this horse.
Whoa.
If there's a bid.
Mm.
And the attendance was much lower. There were a lot of no bids on horses, a lot of horses not meeting reserve prices. And so we just said right then and there, I said, well, we just need to pull this horse from the sale. And we did, like an hour before she was supposed to go through the ring. And lo and behold, as usual, you had your normal stock market volatility. And then by the summer, things were back to kind of normal again. And she sold for $80,000. So the industry is very tied to what's going on in world economies. And then it's very fickle as well. And that's what I'm talking about. The odds can be so much against you. You may have the horse at the wrong sale at the wrong time, for one reason or another. And, maybe if you'd sold it a month later, it would go for 3 times as much. There's so much that goes on. So that's one story. And the other one is, in 2022, there was a horse that I bred still with my mother. So we're half in on this horse, and we sold him as a yearling in 2021. We foaled him in the state of Iowa, and we sold him in the state of Iowa, and he started racing up there in 2022. And his name was Tyler's Tribe. And he was named that way because the owner's grandson had childhood leukemia. And so the grandson's name was Tyler, and his tribe were all the people that were helping him deal with the treatment and care for him and show him support and that kind of stuff. Well, this horse ended up winning all of his first 5 races. The combined, when you added up how much he won each race by, when you combined them all together over 5 races, it was 59.5 lengths. So basically, this horse is one of the fastest 2-year-old horses in the country. And so from there, he was actually entered in, you could call it, they call it the Breeders' Cup World Championship. We just call it the Breeders' Cup. And it's like the beginning of November, there's a series of races in all of the thoroughbred racing disciplines that have some of the highest purse allowances for the race, and they call it the World Championship. So horses will come in from around the world, and they host it in different locations every year. And that year it was here in Lexington, Kentucky. And as a breeder with just a few mares, somehow we had a horse entered in the Breeders' Cup as a 2-year-old. And, so that to that point, it was an incredibly positive memory. My mother likes to complain that she'd been working at it for 20 years before she had a horse in the Breeders' Cup. And, here I come along, and I'm heavily involved only for a few years at that point. And then I have a horse at the Breeders' Cup. And so unfortunately, and this kind of gets into one of your questions about caring for thoroughbreds, unfortunately, there was something that happened in that race. The simple explanation was that he had some blood vessels in his lungs burst, and he didn't even finish the race. And for the most part, his life wasn't threatened at that moment, but it was a fairly serious injury. And I'm going to stop that story there. And for any listeners who want to kind of see look up what ultimately happened to that horse and how he wasn't really cared for that well, you can certainly read it on the internet.
Okay. And I'm hesitant to ask, but the necessary follow-up, young Mr. Tyler, how did his story end up?
He is fully cured and free of leukemia.
Excellent. Okay.
That was a very positive outcome of that. And there was some, at least in the horse world, there was a lot of media around that too.
Good. All right. Well, if somebody wanted to learn more about your work in breeding, do you have a website? You put photos online? Is there you talked about an online community, for better or for worse. Where do people find more about what you do?
Yeah. So for me, if you want to follow what I do with horses, you just have to either connect with me on Facebook, and I can probably give you guys this so you can share in the link. My girlfriend has a Instagram page where she shares a lot of the horse activities. She's better with the kind of the media stuff than I am. So she's Chris at Clifton Photos on Instagram, and so she posts there regularly. And it's mostly just every once in a while there's a copy of or a video of one of our horses winning a race, but most of the time it's like horses breaking fence boards and us having to put them back up, or when a storm blows through, we have trees down on the farm and spend 2 days chopping them all up and getting rid of them and that kind of stuff.
Did she come from the horse world, or is she learning about it through you?
She's learning about it through me. Yeah, we've been together almost 3 years now,
Okay.
And she had no idea about this beforehand, but
Now she does.
She's 100% into it.
Excellent. Yep. Good. We've got to get you off to Keeneland. If people wanted to find out more about your professional world, the work that you're doing with combat veterans and hoping to do with jockeys, where do they find the professional financial advisor version of you?
Yeah, great question. For my military veterans out there, my business is called Trophy Point Financial Planning. trophypointfp.com is the website where they can find me, and also can easily connect with me on LinkedIn if they're on LinkedIn, and that's my veteran-facing internet presence. And then for people in the horse industry, I have a website called Jockey Money Matters, and that's where I post articles, specifically discussing finances for jockeys. And that's probably the best place to find me.
What is Trophy Point? What's the story there?
So Trophy Point is related to the college I went to. So it's the U.S. Military Academy in New York, and there is a location at the academy there called Trophy Point, and they have these a lot of cannons from the Civil and Revolutionary Wars, and then there's a monument there called Battle Monument, and that lists all of the U.S. Army regular soldiers who were killed during the Civil War. So most of the soldiers that were involved in the Civil War were actually like volunteers who were part of state militia. That's why you have like the names, 13th New Jersey or 20th Maine, right?
Indy 11.
But the Army did have a complement of active duty soldiers when the war started, and they still had some of them join throughout the war. And those soldiers who died were killed in action in the war are listed on Battle Monument. So that's where Trophy Point comes from. And my logo is kind of a combination of T and P with what the monument looks like.
So anybody who went to West Point immediately understands that. Do the other branches of the service have a clue about what Trophy Point is, or do you have to explain to those morons from the Navy what's up?
Of course. No, most of them won't know. But, every once in a while, I'll get crap from, another academy graduate, whether it's Air Force or Navy. But interestingly enough, it doesn't come up that much.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you for explaining that for us, and my apologies to all the Navy people out there, especially Bridget, who we had on earlier in the month. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah, Derek, this is really, really cool. Thank you so much for coming on and telling us about your unexpected hobby, breeding racehorses. It's really cool.
My pleasure. As you guys can tell, I can talk on and on about it.
Well, best wishes to you and your animals today.
Thank you very much.
Unexpected Hobbies of Financial Advisors is brought to you by Fiduciary CFO, forward-thinking tax and planning solutions for business owners, like RIA firms and their business owner clientele. The opinions of Brian, Joshua, and their guests are for entertainment purposes and should not be construed as legal, tax, financial, or investment advice. You should know better than to take any of this content seriously. Thanks for being a fan of the show. If you were listening and thought to yourself, hey, I know somebody they need to have on the show, you can do something about that. Go to unexpectedhobbies.com/nominate and tell us who they are and what they do that's so interesting and unexpected. If we agree, we'll send them an invitation and we'll hope they say yes. That's unexpectedhobbies.com/nominate.